This is a tutorial on how I modify my MetaHuman faces. The software I'll be using today is Unreal. Houdini will do the heavy lifting to create the new shape of the face. One step will require Blender, and I'll use Faceware for the facial capture. I'm going to use a plugin that can be purchased on the marketplace. It's called Mesh Morpher, and it really makes this process much easier. There are many tutorials online with how to alter the MetaHuman face in Maya, but what I like about this technique with Mesh Morpher is that it's pretty painless to get it working properly in Unreal. The first step is using MetaHuman Creator to have a base MetaHuman to work with. For this example, I'm trying to use skin that has a lot of detail in the texture. Generally, older faces tend to look more interesting, so that's what I went with here. So, starting from scratch, let's import our MetaHuman into Unreal and let the shaders compile. Once our MetaHuman is ready, load in the Mesh Morpher plugin and restart Unreal. Navigate to the base mesh, select it, and launch the Mesh Morpher plugin. Once it's open, go to Tools, Export Mesh, Export as OBJ, watertight. This is the mesh we'll modify in Houdini. I'm going to need another face mesh to use as the template for our MetaHuman. This could be a mesh that you make in a program like ZBrush or Blender. I'm going to use a character from Paragon. If you're not familiar with this, a few years ago, Epic released all the character assets from one of their games. Even though it's been a few years, they're still very high quality. The only catch is that they have to be rendered in Unreal. I'm going to use Wukong here. I'm going to add him to my project. Once he's in my project, I'm going to navigate to his mesh and export that to be used in Houdini. I'm going to assume that some people who are watching this aren't too familiar with Houdini. There are three tools that I'll be using in Houdini that I'll explain before we get started. Enumerate. Alright, I'm going back and making an edit here because I tried to explain this the first time and I don't think I did a great job. So when we look at what a blend shape is, you can see if we look up over here, every point in Houdini, it's easy to access the point order or the point number that it's associated with. So if I go through and I look at this, you can see that each point has a number associated with it. And I'm going to go from this original grid that I have over here. So you can see here's the point numbers. And then over here, I'm just doing a transform. So I'm moving it. And then that transform is being fed into the blend shape node. And the blend shape node over here, it's a really simple node. All it does is it looks at the point number and it just kind of linearly interpolates between the positions. So if I go back and forth, you can see over here how it's just going back and forth between those two positions. Now, if this point order gets messed up, so that's what I'm going to do with this node, this sort node here. This sort node, I have it set to random. And now when I do that, you can see that the point numbers, they're all going to be in kind of random positions. It mixes up all the point orders. So now when I go to the blend shape node and I try to blend between these two, we can see that everything is going to get messed up in a big way. So to fix this, because this is going to happen to us in our project, because what I want to do is I'm going to break the face into its different connected pieces. And that way we can get a higher quality deformation. Like when I deform it to the other face, it'll look better if we do it individually. If we try to do it all at once, sometimes the pieces kind of get confused and they kind of bump into one another. So I'm going to drop down this node here called Enumerate. And all of this does, it's a really simple node. All it's going to do is it stores over here whatever the point number is, it's going to store that on the geometry. And the name here, index, you can just type in any name that you want. The default is index, and I changed it from primitives to points as the default. And now that on its own, that's not going to change anything. It's still going to be messed up. But what I can do is drop down another sort node over here. But this time, it's going to be sorted by an attribute, and it's going to look for the index number, or sorry, the index attribute. And so the index attribute over here, it's going to basically reorder them back to the way they were. So if you look at the point numbers over here, you'll see that if I drop down the sort node and I look at it over here, then now all the point ordering goes back to the way that it was. So now if I go here to the blend shape, it fixes that problem. Okay, So hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully this edit isn't too abrupt or too bad in the video. Topo Transfer. I'll use another piece of software to demonstrate. This is Wrap 3D. In this example, they have a scan with tons of geometry on it. They also have a clean mesh that they can wrap around the scan, keeping the nice edge flow. Topo Transfer in Houdini basically does the same thing. Point Deform can move geometry based on how you move other geometry. For example, I have this pig head over here. Now over here I have a bunch of points. I put this into the second input. If I move or alter those points, the pig head gets moved in the same way. Here's another example just with a grid. It doesn't matter what geometry I put into the two last inputs. I just need to make sure that they're only deforming it, not deleting or adding any points. But however I deform the third input, that will apply to the first input. With all that out of the way, let's get into Houdini. I'm importing the MetaHuman with a file node. I'm importing the Paragon character with an FBX character import node. This node will automatically convert the scale of the character to Houdini scale, but I'll turn that off since the MetaHuman is an OBJ file and that doesn't automatically convert its scale. I'm going to line up the two geometries as close as I can, paying particular attention to the eyes. Since the eyes rotate, it's important that we try to minimize the amount that they're being adjusted. I think to get the eyes perfect, we'd have to manipulate the eye bones, but we're going to avoid this today and just get them as close as we can. Once that's done, I want to isolate the face mesh. Right now I'm adjusting the selection parameters so that I can select geometry based off of the material. And then I'm selecting that material, deleting it, and then inverting that so that I'm actually keeping that material. And then I'm selecting the arm geometry and I'm going to delete that. Now I'm making a few adjustments to the position, and then eventually I drop down a switch node just to check to make sure the alignment is okay. I'm trying to, again, make sure that the eyes are moving as little as possible. On the MetaHuman, before I do anything else, I'm dropping down two enumerate nodes to record the point order and the primitive order. In Houdini, polygons are sometimes referred to as primitives. Once those are dropped down, I'm using a blast node to delete the face geometry, and then I turn on delete non-selected, which inverts the operation, keeping the face geometry. Now I get to the main part of what we're doing today. I'm dropping down a Topo Transfer node and connecting the two faces to the inputs. The basic operation is that you click a landmark on one face. Here I'm starting with the eyelids. Then you click on the corresponding landmark on the other geometry. I do find this node is a bit sensitive. You have to be using manifold geometry. You can press Ctrl-G to go back and forth between the two geometries. Then try to hit the major landmarks of the face, like points around the eyes, nose, mouth, ears, and then I do a few others scattered around the face. Once all the landmarks are done, hit Solve in the toolbar and wait. On my computer, it took about 3 minutes for Houdini to spit out the final input. After the Topo Transfer node, I attached a Stash node, which stores the geometry onto the HIP file itself, so I don't have to recalculate it again, unless I want to. I want the bottom part of the geometry to have the same neckline as the original MetaHuman. This will let me merge it back onto the original MetaHuman body. I'm going to drop down a node called Attribute VOP. This node allows me to modify attributes on the geometry. In this case, the attribute I want to manipulate is the position of the points. I'm going to have my new altered MetaHuman go into the first input, and the original MetaHuman geometry will go into the second input. I'll double-click to go inside this node. I'm going to create a simple network here. I'm making an import point attributes node, and I'm going to be sure for it to read the second input. This is where I'll be able to connect to the original MetaHuman. I can make a mix node, which will allow me to blend the position of the points together. Then I'll use a bind node to control where the mix happens. The bind node allows me to import other attributes that are on my geometry. I'll go back up a level, back to my geometry context, and I'll add an attribute paint node. This will let me paint the areas I want to blend. Now I'll start to paint and then smooth out the transition. This attribute delete node is just going to clear out the masking I made. In the next step, I'm going to do something really very similar to what I just did. I'm going to smooth out parts of his face. If we look closely, we can see some parts could be smoother. So I'll smooth out the entire mesh, and then I'll copy the attribute VOP node that I made before. The only difference is that the second input here will be the smoothed out face. Now when I paint, I'll be transferring the position of the smooth points to the original face. After the face is done, I'll drop down a null, which I usually color black so that it's easily found and helps to keep my project file organized. At first, I did try to do the face all in one shot, but I found that I would get much better results if they broke the mesh down into different parts and then recombined them afterwards. So now I'm grabbing the teeth from Wukong and the teeth from the MetaHuman, using blast nodes to isolate them. There's not a whole lot to say in this part. I'm just doing the same thing that I did before. Now might be a good time to notice I'm trying to keep my node graph a little bit more clear. I'm coloring the nodes that are connected to the original MetaHuman blue, and then the pink nodes, they're the same body part, just connected to the Paragon character. Once the teeth are done, there's this other part of the gums that need to be done as well. Instead of using a Topo Transfer, I'm setting up a point to form. The first input is the gums, the second input is the original MetaHuman teeth, the third input is the new position for the MetaHuman teeth. The gums should be moved over to the correct spot. Just to show you, I'm coloring the gums red. Here I'm just trying to keep the node graph clean by attaching another null, just to having the output of the teeth right there. Now I'm doing the left eye. Same procedure. I'm selecting the eye from Wukong, then the eye from the MetaHuman. This Topo Transfer will go much quicker, just 2 points and a quick solve. One of the main advantages of using Houdini over a program like Wrap would be that you have the full access to Houdini's modeling tools, which are pretty complete. So if a wrap didn't turn out the way you wanted, you could go in and edit it using Houdini's poly modeling tools right after. I'm fast forwarding through the second eye since it's the exact same procedure. One thing you might notice is the mesh that came out of Mesh Morpher. It will have information about all the different connected pieces, all the different geometry that's actually fused together. So things like the eyes and the teeth, they're easily separatable. In the blast node, if you go to the drop-down menu, you'll see a listing of all the different connected pieces. They won't be labeled, but you can go through, and that's the easy way to separate, the face, the teeth, the eyes, rather than going and selecting them manually. So it's a nice thing that all the fused geometry together is easily selectable. I'm going to make another quick edit to my video here, just because I think the first time I went through this, I kind of rushed through a little bit. So the trickiest part is really getting the eyes to work right. I've mentioned that a couple times, I think, in the video so far. So what I'm doing here is there's these different parts of the MetaHuman that have like all these edges and things are like around the eyes. So I merge those parts together, and then I want to move this to the new position of where Wukong, where his eyes are. So what I'm doing over here is I'm taking if I look at it here, I have a merge here. So what these are is, this is the original position of my MetaHuman eyes, which would be the same position that these eyes are in. And then I'm saying, well, I want to move that based off of where I put those eyes over here for Wukong. So here's the original MetaHuman eyes here, and then over here, here's the new position of the MetaHuman eyes to match where Wukong's eyes were. So this movement here I could do another Topo Transfer for these pieces, but if I've already moved the eyes over here with like this operation, if I went from here to here, then why do that again? So I'm putting that into a point deform just to save me a bit of time. So here is the position of the eyes, or sorry, the eye detail that I have here, and then these two merge nodes are going to move it so that now they're over in that position. It's very subtle. It's like a small movement, but rather than doing a point deform, which could give me very different results, just it might be off a little bit. I'm using the exact kind of positioning that I did for these ones here to move them. So over there I have that point deform, and then over here, the eyelashes were really tricky because sometimes with eyelashes, based on what you're moving it, because they're so long and they're away from the body, sometimes other points grab them and they get all kind of gnarled up. So what I did for that was, if you look at this one, I took it from the original MetaHuman, like his face, and then I grabbed it from down over here, which is the new position that I placed him in. This visualization, this is just from the attribute paint node where I smoothed out parts of his face. So that's not gonna matter for what I'm doing with the eyelashes. I'm just taking this position here and that new position of those points, and then that's going all the way over here for the eyelashes. So if I have the eyelashes here, they're being moved based off of those meshes with the point deform like that. And then the other thing I did was I just changed, I probably skipped this over quickly in the video. Originally they're like this, and you can kind of smooth them out by averaging a few other points. So it gets a little bit more of a nicer natural result with that. And then that output is going to get over here with my merge, which has all the other body parts combined together. And then I just did an attribute delete down over here, which I think you'll probably see in the video, but I just deleted anything that I added. So the mask input and the index values that I did with the enumerate, I did that over here, but I'll get to that. You'll see that in a second. As a quality check, I'm attaching a blend shape node from the original MetaHuman to my new MetaHuman and see if they blend together nicely. If they do, then I'm good to go. If I don't, then I'll have problems back in Unreal and Mesh Morpher. I can see here that I clearly have a problem. To fix this, we can call on the information we saved earlier with the enumerate node. Drop down a sort node, and we're going to change it to sort by attribute and set the attribute to index. I'm doing this for both the points and the primitives. Now the shapes blend smoothly. After all this is done, I'm going to drop down a ROP geometry output node and save out my geometry. The next step is to just make sure my geometry is oriented properly. And I'm just importing my geometry and saving it out again. Blender has a very handy option to set the orientation of your geometry when you save it. In order for Mesh Morpher to work, I need to save my geometry so it's facing -x and +z is the up axis. I do this for both the original MetaHuman OBJ file and the altered Wukong OBJ file that I just saved out from Houdini. Now I can go back into Unreal and use Mesh Morpher to apply the blend shape. Select the face mesh, click on Mesh Morpher, and go to Tools, Create from OBJ file. You load in the base and the target meshes. Set the scale in X to -1, and the threshold can be set to a very low number, like 0, and then 4 zeros and then a 1. Hit OK and let it do its thing. When it's done, go back to the asset editor in Unreal and scroll to the bottom of the blend shape list. You should see your new blend shape. Set the value to 1 and you should see the new shape. It is possible in Mesh Morpher to bake this out to a new mesh, but I prefer to apply this blend shape using blueprints. Go into the MetaHuman blueprint. We're going to add just a few nodes to the construction script and the event graph. In the event graph, add the set morph shape node. Connect it to the very last node that was already there. Then just write in the name of the blend shape and set the value to 1. Then add a custom event and give it the name enable morph wukong, or whatever your name of your model is. Connect that, and then go into the construction script and add the enable morph wukong node. Compile and save, and you're good to go. You should see your new face in the editor. Now we're going to use the MetaHuman Creator lighting presets that cinematographer Greg Fraser worked on. This is a free project that's available on the marketplace. Download this and launch it as a new project. Select your MetaHuman and migrate it to the MHC lighting preset project that we just made. Add the MetaHuman to your scene. In my case, you can see that the hair has lost its binding. This has happened to me a lot recently, and I'm assuming that it's a bug. It tends to happen to me fairly often, and I'm hoping this gets fixed at some point. The fix is very easy. To fix it, just search for binding in your content browser. Open up your MetaHuman blueprint, click on the groom, and then drag and drop the bindings. Compile, save. Once that's fixed, create a new level sequence, and then create a camera. At this point, I'm going to do some facial capture. I was going to make a whole tutorial on how to use Faceware, but a much better tutorial has come along. As I was preparing this tutorial, a new course was released on the Unreal Learning portal that's all about MetaHuman face capture with Faceware Studio. I highly recommend that you check this out. I've only gone through half of it as of me recording this right now, but I've already learned several things that I'll be using in the future. Faceware has an indie license that's affordable, and with some tweaking, you can get some pretty amazing results. Of course, if budget is a consideration, you can always use the iPhone Live Link, but Faceware does have several advantages going for it. Okay, so this tutorial is getting a little bit long, but I'll briefly talk about what I did to get the body movement. I had some motion capture of someone talking, but it was rigged to the Unreal mannequin. So I brought that animation into Houdini to retarget it for my MetaHuman. Retargeting in Houdini can be done pretty easily. First, I'm using a rig stash pose node. This allows me to work on the bind pose, and then later the settings can be applied to the moving animation. Then I drop down a rig match pose node. This is where you make sure both bind poses are aligned. Once that's done, you can use a map points node to connect the joints from one mesh to another. I find this much more intuitive than Unreal's retargeting drop-down menu list. Once that's done, you can drop down a full body IK node to transfer the motion from one skeleton to the other. We could filter and modify this further, but instead I'm just going to write this out. Once that's set up, I just applied the animation to the MetaHuman like you would normally. And I think that's it for this tutorial. So thanks for watching. I really tried to edit this down to get it to be tight, but if I went too fast, please leave comments. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. I appreciate it. And subscribe if you want. I mean, I'm gonna try to do more Houdini and Unreal tutorials in the future. So yeah, and if you made anything with these techniques, please tag me or message me. I'd love to see what you made with it. That would be awesome to see. So thanks.